Mental Liberation, an Iron March publication, Chapter 2, Mental Liberation. Origins of the Modern Paradigm. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who think they are free, and the bigger is the lie, and the more frequently it is told, the easier it is to believe. And the biggest lie of them all, that keeps us all enslaved, is that of the modern world. In this manual, we will explore the origins of modern world thinking, how deep it runs, what are the vehicles of its enforcement, and how one can break the shackles of mental control placed over them by the system in order to keep them subdued. Without breaking these shackles, any further manuals would serve little to no purpose, as the person reading them would be too afraid to act out on much of the advice being provided to him, because he would still be held back by invisible strings that were attached to him from birth by this world. The allegory of the Matrix becomes all too real if one were to take a large enough step back to see the full scope of the problem. Getting the full scope of things is the first crucial step we must go over in order to see the origins of our enslavement to a world of lies and falsehoods. We, as fascists, know that we live in a state of decline and degeneration, also known as involution. The starting point of this decline is natural and takes roots in the decay of the superior ideals and the loss of a connection with and vision of the spiritual side of reality, thereby leaving humanity stranded in the purely material side with a purely material perception. It is at this point that the decay takes a more aggressive turn, and it can be symbolically referred to as the death of God, or the twilight of the gods, Ragnarok. Once we have lost our spiritual view of the world, we had become susceptible to a false and purely material interpretation of things around us, introducing falsehoods that lead not merely to decay, introducing falsehoods that lead not merely decay or loss of spiritual roots, but to a rampantly self-destructive process. In other words, before the death of God, we experience a slow decay like that of an organism dying of natural causes, and upon the death of God, we experience a rapid and malignant degeneration like that of an organism injected with poison. That poison is the modern worldview, the purely material, intellectual, rationalistic, abstract perception that only serves utilitarian purposes and is driven by pure self-interest. However, this poison was not introduced to us forcefully. We never saw the needle coming. It was introduced by us ourselves in our foolishness as we suffered from the earlier form of decay. It was an act of delusion on a civilizational scale. As we lost sight of the spiritual and focused on the material, we lost a superior frame of reference for what is true and false in the material world, and thus took the poison and injected it into ourselves, thinking it was a great revelation. From that point on, the poison used our society's circulatory system to deliver itself everywhere it could to cause havoc, and it's been in circulation ever since. The original point, when the poison was introduced, happened so long ago that since then the processes that it caused became considered the norm, and the few people who could still retain some conception of there being a higher truth recognized that fact and have been fighting to restore real order to society. Today that task falls to us fascists. However, when we again take into consideration how long ago the poison was introduced, it became apparent how fundamentally different our worldview is from the one that is enforced today, seeing how we wish to restore the worldview of truth, whereas the existing system is interested in perpetuating the worldview of lies created by this poison, because it cannot sustain itself without said lies. Moreover, it becomes apparent that the worldview we are fighting isn't just what we are being told to believe in about the contemporary world. It is also what we are being told to believe in about generations of human history, all the way up to the point of when the poison was introduced, and further back still, as the materialist perception and degeneracy created by that poison are being now projected onto the rest of history that existed before the death of God. In other words, almost everything you know is a lie, a massive lie, that has been repeated to people for generations, and it is a lie that makes people think that the way they live today is a natural and positive product of history rather than a result of decay. It is a lie that makes people think they are free, when in reality they are enslaved and on a path to self-destruction. And it is a lie that we are all, practically without exception, are brought into from birth. Few manage to identify it. Fewer still manage to escape it fully. If you believe that you have escaped this lie completely, then think again, as it is highly likely that you are still held back in your actions by considerations that have been instilled in you since birth by the system that wishes to handicap your opposition to it and the worldview it relies on for its perpetuity until it ultimately crashes along with all of humanity, starting with the white race. Almost everything you know is a lie that you have been sold your whole life, a lie that your parents had most likely bought into, a lie that your grandparents had most likely bought into, and their parents before them, and their parents before them, and etc., for many more generations. Make no mistake, the state of the world we find ourselves in today is not a recent development. It may be a recent stage of the disease as it progresses to its more critical and terminal symptoms, but its origins take roots even long before the French Revolution. Albeit that event marked a particular new stage in the progression of the poison's ill effects on the body of our society. You can think back to the leftist concept of the march through the institutions. However, this march would have never taken place had said institutions not been sick in the first place, allowing for a more radical stage of the disease to come through. Moreover, leftism would never have appeared in the first place had our society been healthy. How we were poisoned. So now that we know the principles behind the origin of this poison, let us consider what was poisoned in a practical sense. We mentioned how what was altered was our perception of the world, how we bought into lies and falsehoods and accepted them as truth and facts. What happened next was the introduction of these same lies and falsehoods into the way we conducted research, education, and governance. Keenly important in this instance are the educational elements. Nowadays, you will hear complaints from the liberal masses about evil propaganda and indoctrination. However, those things are in principle the exact same as education and socialization, something that human society relies on at large to perpetuate itself in any given form. However, liberals will use the terms propaganda and indoctrination as the evil, crooked images of education and socialization for anything promoted that is counter to the modern worldview. The irony is, of course, that it is the prevalent system of today that is in effect crooked, as it uses education and socialization to continue the circulation of poison in the societal bloodstream. Education and socialization, these are the main arteries through which we pass down knowledge and understanding of the world. So if the well of knowledge is incomplete or worse still poisoned, then all who drink from it are likewise gaining incomplete knowledge and poison. Which is all the better for the system that relies on this poison of lies and falsehoods in order to perpetuate itself, but all the worse for the people who are speeding up their own demise. To sum up, at one point in time, decaying society was injected with a poison that through education and socialization kept perpetuating itself for generations, and since this was done willingly in a delusional state, there is nothing we can point to in history as a kind of outside event that forced this upon society, making the lie of it being a naturally positive process all the more believable. And so this great lie continues and everyone thinks they know the truth. A person is born, raised by their parents, who raise the children according to what they know, and the child is shaped in one way or another by that process. The person is then sent off to be educated and socialized. Likewise, this shapes him in one way or another. The person grows up in a society that further contributes to shaping him in one way or another. He further still engages this society, pursuing his goals that are the result of all that has been affecting him previously. Finally, the person has a child of their own and raises the child according to what they know. The cycle starts over again. Now imagine this process poisoned with the purely material worldview of lies and falsehoods, decay and death. Imagine this process repeating for generations. You don't have to imagine it, you're living it. That is the great reality we face today. Generations of successful conditioning that created a logical chain of events which produced more and more devastating effects on society and hence the conditions we find ourselves in today. You should be able to see now why few people manage to identify the problem, and fewer still manage to escape the invisible strings that are attached to us all. Ever since the original point of when the poison was introduced, we had thinkers and philosophers who operated on the premise of the poison being a great revelation, and they have been building their conclusions on that delusional premise. You'll hear our opposition say, "You really think yourself smarter than generations of scientists, thinkers, and people who shape the world as we know it today?" Well, we may not be smarter than them, but we fascists stand where we stand because we managed to identify the initial fault of their premise. In its essence, the modern world is not a grand accomplishment of centuries of materialist thought, but rather the result of a critical mistake made at the beginning of a mathematical equation. Say you got the wrong answer for what x equals in a mathematical formula. It doesn't matter how smart you are and how correct you solve the rest of the equation, because the initial mistake will make the deviation from the correct answer grow with each action performed in the equation. We had made our mistake centuries ago, and all these smart scientists, thinkers, philosophers, and people who shape the world as we know it today have been building on that initial mistake, and with each added solution they've been drawing us further and further away from the truth through seemingly logical conclusions. That is another reason why the poison was so successful in perpetuating itself, besides the lack of an outside source. It was purposely built on as if it were some kind of revelation. It is as if scientists were trying to improve what they thought was a cure, but instead were making improvements to a disease, simply because they were too busy with its intricate particulars to see the whole picture. But then again, how could they see the full scope of what they were tackling when they outright denied the existence of a larger scope of view to begin with, namely the spiritual vision of reality? So what do people who buy into the great lie have to face? They are already born into it and accept it. They follow along with its rules and thus help its sustainability. Hence they are essentially left alone, and so they believe themselves to be free, when in reality they are perpetuating their own slavery and what will one day outright kill their descendants. What of the people who refuse to buy into the great lie and actively go against it? That is when the system will rear its head in full force and demonstrate exactly how totalitarian in nature it is, as it will rightly treat such elements as outright enemies of its sustainability. These people can expect the kind of opposition that the great masses of willful slaves will never have to face, because their petty misdemeanors within the scope of the system are still part of the plan. We fascists are the ones who must stand against the great lie. But in doing so, we must stand against modern society as a whole, as it exists as a tool for the perpetuity of the lie. But to do so, we must square off against the system that operates and protects this process of perpetuity. Yet when we consider the sheer scope of the lie in question, it is only too evident how hard it will be to fully untangle ourselves from its web in order to engage in any meaningful opposition to the system. Hence, the necessity of this first manual. I'm going to take a swig here. Me ne frego, or me ne frego. Not sure what that means. The aim of this manual is to turn its reader into an island or a fortress that stands defiantly in the storm of lies that surround him. This means a kind of internal self-sufficiency that would essentially make the person a standalone element that exists outside of the system's subtle influence, regardless of his physical presence in the system. Let's list all the ways in which the system applies passive pressure to people who are enslaved to it. Bullet point 1. These aren't actually numbered, but there are 3 here. It's the first of the 3. Parents pressure their children to go through official education and do well for personal pride and desire for their child to be able to support himself by playing along with the system's rules. If they fail, then they are regarded as bad parents who didn't fail the system's expectations but failed themselves as parents. Whatever wrongs their children commit reflect on them and their social standing. 2. Educational institutions pressure young people to become apt in ways that are useful to the system, but one cannot even engage in a good deal of the system's workforce without a sanctioned piece of paper that validates a person's standing. Lack of system validation diminishes a person's social standing. He is regarded at the very least as not all that smart, if not altogether incompetent, a loser, or a good-for-nothing. 3. Engagement in the system's workforce creates responsibilities and obligations to the system with raised expectations placed on the person. Not being engaged in its workforce is regarded highly negatively, with comments ranging from how someone's worth is defined by their ability to make a living to how one is a leech on society. In a normal, healthy society, all these same pressures exist, but to help perpetuate said healthy society in today's system, however, all these pressures help preserve the existence of poison in a society that leads to its ultimate destruction. The fascist revolutionary is a person who cannot be swayed by any of these pressures and acts without reference to social norms as an outside source for his code of conduct. My colors are inverted here, so I can't tell, but that looks like it's in bold. Instead, the fascist revolutionary relies on an internalized worldview that guides him to actively fight the system and then create a new healthy society. If our goal is creation of a new society, then we cannot be concerning ourselves with the existing system or with what it may think of us. You cannot be swayed by expectations placed on you by the masses of people who play along with the system's rules. They are assisting the enemy, including those that may support you in theory but will never do so in practice and maintain a life within the system's rules. This is the definitive difference between supporters and real fanatics, activists, revolutionaries. The latter make that step over the line where they have no stakes in the system and thus are free to bring it down. Your own family will expect you to do as they did, to go along with the system's expectations. They may tell you that they are ashamed of you because you didn't play along as they did and thus made them look bad. They may tell you that you should feel ashamed because that is what they believe to be the normal reaction. That is what the system taught them. Remember, they want you to take part in the system. You want to destroy it. Their view of you is irrelevant. They cannot pressure you on behalf of the system. Educators will expect you to swallow the poison they help dispense. It is their job to shape you into a cog, an interchangeable piece in the system's machinery of a workforce. Remember, they want to make you into a part of the system. You want to destroy it. Their view of you is irrelevant. They cannot pressure you on behalf of the system. Other students will expect you to do the same because they believe their parents and the system and are actively gearing up to engage themselves in it by its rules. Remember, they want to take part in the system. You want to destroy it. Their view of you is irrelevant. They cannot pressure you on behalf of the system. People engaged in the system's workforce will shame you for not being like them, for not being a cog in the machine of their own destruction. Remember, they feel validated by being part of the system. You want to destroy it. Their view of you is irrelevant. They cannot pressure you on behalf of the system. Elder generations will shame you for not living out your life in the same kind of servitude that they dedicated themselves to. Listen to your elders is bullshit when your elders are the ones responsible for furthering the state of decay of society. What they may find distasteful today is something they helped bring about themselves. Remember, they feel like you are invalidating their wasted lives as slaves to the system. You don't want to end up like them. You want to destroy it. Their view of you is irrelevant. They cannot pressure you on behalf of the system. To anyone who dares to try and pressure you on behalf of the system, simply reply with the fascist slogan and mantra, "Me ne frego." I don't give a damn. With those words, you declare that you are not a slave to the system. You are not the same as those around you. They rely on the system and keep each other enslaved by applying that pressure. They will try to pull you back in with them and keep you there, to die with them. That is the path to mental liberation, to liberating yourself from the hidden strings attached to us all that urge us to play along with the system's rules, or else. Or else what? The enemy is your best ally. When talking strictly about mental liberation and becoming an outsider within the bowels of the system, it has very few punitive measures. What can the system truly do to you? Play along with the system's rules, or else you can no longer play. That's it. The only thing the system can do against an internally liberated person is to shut him out of the social playground where all the nice and obedient slaves make pretend they are free and important. Without a diploma, that piece of paper that provides social validation, the system won't open the doors to a big portion of its workforce. This is the scary consequence that keeps the good slaves motivated to study hard, so they can work hard for the system. But our goal is to destroy the system, so that outcome is not, in fact, one that a fascist revolutionary fears. A real fascist will never say, "I am so afraid that I won't be able to slave away for the system that is destroying our society and our race." So the scariest thing the system can do to us in this situation is tell us that we are penalized by its rules from being able to entangle ourselves deeper in its web. Our enemy is in fact our greatest ally, because the more we will resist the system, the more it will push us out, and the more free we will become of it. We don't want to play along, so it doesn't want us in the mix. Good. We won't lose anything when we make it crash and burn. Those who have stakes in the system are reluctant to take action against it or desperately try to find a way of doing it while playing along with the rules. It is a foolish idea. Playing along with its rules only makes you entangled in its web and makes you dependent on it, thus limiting your freedom to act. Presentability and respectability are not virtues to a fascist revolutionary. Whom are we trying to be presentable to? For whose sake are we supposed to look respectable? The slaves who will never take action? There is no silent majority that will come out to fight the enemy of their race should the call arise. They have too much at stake in the system as it is now, and they have no real understanding of the issues that we are facing. So who is it then? The system itself? Our enemy? Do you think it will matter if you're dressed in a suit when the revolution happens? Or do you think the suit will help you win without the need of revolution? Then go back and read again how playing along with its rules only makes you more of a slave to the system. Looking for presentability and respectability only means trying to either play by the system's rules or appearing to do so. If it is the latter case, then it is because you want to make a respectable case for fascism. Then you have already lost, because we stand for truth and there can be no compromises about the truth, because the only compromise possible is to accept a lie. But that only spells the defeat of truth. Compromise is immediate defeat. Or is it because you want to become a submarine in enemy waters, appearing calm on the surface before you make a strike? That course is commendable, but it is also extremely serious and tough. It is literally akin to becoming a spy in a foreign country. You can never reveal to anyone your true beliefs and act like you do have a stake in the system before you reveal that you never had any, and proceed to crash and burn all that you've worked for within the system that helped you along the way to executing your strike. This path of action will require its own manual. Now, if you are an open fascist and a revolutionary at that, then you go ahead and burn all bridges with the system. Push against its invisible strings and watch the system cut them from you, figuring it's punishing you when it is actually freeing you. Let the systems shut doors in your face. Let the system shut doors in your face. Let it make you into a pariah. It will be more than glad to do it, but the more it shuts you out, the stronger your resolve will grow. The more you grow into that island that will weather any storm, the higher will grow the fortifications of your inner fortress. Help the system drop all pretense. Help it stop baiting you into playing along with its rules and instead make it spell it out loud and clear. You are enemies at war. Make all of its slaves know it. Speak your mind. Be true and firm to what your actual stance is. Let them recoil. Let them try and shame you. Let them try to pull you back into it. Keep pushing them until the system decides it won't stand for it. Be an agitator. Speak your mind where you study. Speak your mind where you work. Let them know exactly what you are fighting against, who is at fault, who is complacent, where it is all going, who will be the first to pay for their crimes. Outside the system. Forget system education and good system jobs. Learn a trade. Gain some practical skills that are universally needed and will come in handy for the revolution. You may be out, but you're not down. You can live outside the system. You may be out, but you're not down. You can live outside the system strings while still utilizing its services, or better yet, you can escape the system physically, as well as mentally, and become completely independent of it. Other manuals will focus on how to become a fascist revolutionary in the practical sense and deal with living in and outside the system physically. However, physical liberation and true fascist revolutionary conduct will be nay impossible if you have not first achieved mental liberation. Only when you will feel like an unmovable rock in a stream of water, constantly pushed against but to no avail, when you feel like you are moving through system surroundings but have nothing tying you to them, when you feel like you can do anything and don't fear the consequences, only then can you start truly contemplating real action on the path of fascist revolution. That concludes Chapter 2.